Going to talk about negative messages in routine business correspondence. So, just like positive messages, negative messages are actually meant for a very specific purpose, and that is to build relationships. So, even though we're dealing with bad news or negative situations, the goal is to continue business relationships and to create future opportunities. It's not to shut them down. So, everything that we're going to be doing in the negative messages is going to be towards really building relationships with customers, clients, and our colleagues. So there are some goals in communicating negative news. First of all, negative news must be explained clearly and completely. You always want to project a professional image, convey empathy and sensitivity, and be fair and impartial. But most of all, a negative message really wants to maintain friendly relations. Negative messages are what we use to kind of continue business relationships, not to shut them down. So there are two strategies for delivering negative news. The direct strategy we used in positive messages. You can use direct strategy in some negative messages. It would work the same as positive messages, where you're going to start with the bad news, give the reasons, and then give a pleasant closing. But most often, for negative news and negative messages, you're going to use an indirect strategy. You're going to begin with a buffer, give the reasons for the negative news, bury the bad news in the middle, and then end with a pleasant closing. And this is really important because if you begin with the bad news, you're liable to get a reader who just shuts down and doesn't finish reading your message. By giving the reasons first, you ensure that they have your reasoning before they shut down with the bad news. So we have this 4-part indirect strategy for bad news. We're going to begin with a buffer. You open with a neutral but meaningful statement that does not mention the bad news. It's really important that your buffer is appropriate, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. Once you give the buffer, you're going to explain the cause of the bad news before disclosing it. If you can make your reasons appeal to your reader or to their sympathies, even better. Once you've given your reasons, then you reveal the bad news, but you do so without emphasizing it. Whenever possible, provide an alternative or compromise. And finally, you always want to end with a personalized, forward-looking, pleasant statement. Again, the tone here should be positive and upbeat. Again, avoid referring to the bad news. So when we think about opening, there are various types of buffers. You can give the best news possible, compliment them. An easy one is just appreciation, thanking them for their message or their concern, providing some sort of agreement, stating a fact that both parties can agree on, or just conveying your sense of sympathy and understanding. The one thing you want to do with a buffer is not make the buffer so positive that your reader expects good news. You want the buffer to be pleasant and neutral. When you present your reasons for the negative news, explain them in detail leading up to the denial. Make sure that you cite reader benefits or benefits to others if relevant. This is a good place to give logical reasoning that your reader might agree with. For example, if you can't give a refund, maybe it's because by not giving cash refunds, you're able to keep your prices low. Or if you're not able to support their project at this time, maybe it's because your company has a very specific deadline or set of instructions for applying that they need to use. Explain the rationale behind any company policies if that's the case. Always choose positive words to keep the reader in a receptive mood and show fairness and serious intent. There are some other techniques you can use for cushioning bad news, including positioning that bad news strategically. Again, you never open up with the bad news. Use passive voice instead of "we can't give a refund can't be given at this time." Highlight the positive when you can, if relevant. You can always imply the refusal. Instead of saying, "no, we can't support you," you can encourage them to apply again in the future. And whenever possible, suggest a compromise or an alternative. Sometimes just because you can't meet the customer's needs at the time, there's another solution that could benefit both of you. So here's an example of an ineffective refusal message. Take a look at how this one works. Right off the bat, in the very beginning, we get this: "we regret to inform you," and after 5 words, your audience knows that the answer is no. Why would they bother reading anything else? The other bad thing about this particular message is it's very writer focused instead of reader focused. It talks about we're striving to stay in business because we have rental payments. And again, it's not really giving the reader any incentive to understand the reasons for the refusal. We can, however, revise that same message into a more appropriate and positive slant. So, starting with a buffer to let them know that you appreciate their business for the past 16 months, giving clear reasons for why the policy is the way it is, and then really buffering the bad news. They can't credit towards purchase price, but they can offer something else. Finally, providing a way to contact and to continue on new business in the future. So when you deliver negative news, make sure that you're thinking about whether this needs to be an email and in hard copy. If you're giving negative news in situations like when you can't reach the customer personally, when you need to establish a record of the incident, when you want to confirm follow-up procedures, or when you want to promote good relations, it's really important to put your bad news messages into writing. So a couple types of bad news messages. One of the big ones is denying claims or denying requests. Some important things to remember is don't blame the customer even if they're at fault. Adopt a proper positive or neutral tone. Avoid any sort of you statements because those can really sound preachy. Things like, you would have known that these are impossible if you'd read your contract. Try to use neutral or objective language so that you can explain why the claim has to be refused, and consider resale information to build confidence in product or organization. So these are some hints and tips about negative messages. You can find more information in our textbook about specific writing plans. And then if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and ask.